Hello and welcome back to the Rise and Fall of the Chill Out Room, a history of ambient house and ambient techno 1989 to 1996. We're back in 1993 once again, and today I'm going to start by looking at Apollo. Apollo's first full year in existence was relatively quiet. The first release was Moonwater by In Existence, the debut release from the ambient project of Martin van der Vleuten, a Dutch producer with more than 24 aliases to his name. Moonwater is quite a strange album, and one that could only have come from the earlier end of the ambient techno era. The 8 tracks on the album are all incredibly varied. Opener, A Mood, is light, airy ambient techno, or drum machines and synths. A fine example of the style, if not unique. Space Indian throws in what I presume are Indian chants. The sample is strangely lo-fi, adding a grittier texture to the otherwise smooth production. Clay Wang, apparently recorded in the 80s, is murkier with post-punk bass, murmured voices and plinky keys. The kind of piece that could have come out of the post-industrial tribal ambient leaning world. It reminds me a little bit of Oyuki Conjugate. It's a striking change of pace after the first 2 chill-out room friendly openers. The epic Eternal Lover cuts the beat and instead focuses on bright major key piano improvisation. It's only a step away from New Age, but soars on some genuinely euphoric melodies. A brief down-tempo rhythm in the last couple of minutes comes in as a genuine surprise, adding an oddly dubby touch. In Search of True Love takes Van der Vleuten closer to his dance roots with breaks and soulful vocal samples, although the piano improv once again adds a soaring touch that keeps the track tied to the more chilled side of things. The title track throws in a very different type of beat, the sort of program breaks that feel surprisingly poppy, over which distorted improv, some strangely jarring background melodies and weird samples come and go. It's a strange track that I've never been able to fully get my head around. Kilometre Cubed, I have to be honest, really annoys me. A weirdly timed beat, an extremely tedious bleepy melody, some out of place piano improv and a bizarrely muddy mix that makes everything feel like it's playing in another room, all combined to create the kind of track that makes me twitch, and it barely changes for more than 8 minutes. The final track, Sequence, is a slice of techno coated in disorientingly wobbly synths that lasts for less than 2 minutes before fading out. Moonwater is an album with some excellent tracks on it, the first 4 in particular, but it never feels unified, and the inconsistency, along with a couple of failed experiments, always keeps it out of the top tier list for me. Nevertheless, there's plenty to enjoy here, and with the album now available easily online, it's one to certainly check out. Plus the cover looks like Galaxy Minstrels and always makes me hungry. On the subject of sweet treats, over to Jam and Spoon. After a debut album of instrumental hip-hop and breakbeats, more a collection of DJ tools than a fully realised album, they took a hard turn into the kind of music that is sometimes called Eurodance, and released a pair of connected albums, Tripomatic Fairytales 2001 and 2002. For the Belgian release, the more dance floor friendly 2001 was released on R&S, and the more ambient leaning 2002 was on Apollo. It was a bold move, as many artists might have just put the two together as a 2 CD and 3 LP set, but fair play to them for trying it. In some ways the double album approach might have worked better, as the trance and ambient split here isn't quite as sharp as it could have been. 2001's down-tempo opener is wonderful and totally fitting for 2002, while the poppier vocal tracks on 2002 are very out of place. The mangled voices and beautiful synth sweeps of Who Opened the Door to Nowhere would also be a perfect fit for the ambient disc. Released in the transitional period where trance had begun to take on Eurodance qualities but hadn't yet become cheesy radio fodder, the material on both discs here should be pretty palatable for ambient techno fans, a couple of tracks aside. Right in the Night's dance pop sound and Paradise Garage's Marauder vibes are honestly out of place even on 2001. 2002 isn't the kind of trance artist does some down-tempo tracks record that someone familiar with later albums, the likes of ATB and York, might expect, and shows that they were clearly invested in the sound. NASA is one of my favourite tracks from the era, a 12-minute beast built around a haunting choral sample that takes nearly 7 minutes to build to its dub rhythms. With samples strewn around throughout, it could easily pass for an orb track from the same era, albeit with a little more emotional resonance from its melancholic mood. Selena's Afternoon combines jazzy electric piano improv with sparse sampling to create a space for dreaming. Angel is Calling follows the structure of NASA, only with a much more uplifting vibe, the kind of piece that brings a gentle feeling of euphoria to the listener, while the telephone samples are reminiscent of aspects of FSOL's radio transmissions. I Saw the Future brings in ethnic chants and spacey synth arpeggios, giving an idea of what Deep Forest might sound like if the producers actually had good taste. The vocal tracks are unfortunate. I'm not completely anti-vocals in ambient music, although it's a hard one to pull off. The dreamy "The Future is in Small Hands" almost works. The backing track is pure ambient house, although Hans Helmer-Sauer's voice is not really suited to this kind of music, with more than a touch of Simple Minds' Jim Kerr to his croon. Secret Kind of Love, however, is full-on 80s pop ballad, right down to naff synth presets. World of XTC follows with a pop reggae vibe that once again will be far more at home on 2001 than this second album. Chop out these tracks and replace them with Heart of Africa and Who Opened the Door to Nowhere, and you've got one of these stronger chill out albums of '93. At least they're at the end, so it's easy to turn off before you have to get to them. Unusually, the CD edition comes packaged with a 12-page booklet. That would have practically doubled the manufacturing price, so for a comparatively small label like Apollo, it was a bold move. Apollo's other 1993 albums were a compilation named after the label, more on that in a later video, and The Irresistible Force's Flying High, licensed from Rising High. There were once again 12-inch EPs. Dave Angel's Family EP is ethereal techno, Lovecraft's Intelligent Universe on the dubby down-tempo end of things. Ken Ishii's Deep Sleep EP is much darker and more ambient in comparison, although he would end up on R&S by the time an album came around. The most interesting EP is Billie Ray Martin's 4 Ambient Tales. Martin, a singer who'd had some success throughout the decade working with different dance producers, collaborated with The Grid for these 4 lush, beatless pop songs. Compositionally, they draw on the singer's background in dance music with a housey soulfulness, but the lack of rhythms gives the tracks a unique feel. It's potentially still too pop-oriented for a lot of ambient fans, but gives an idea of just how far the ambient movement was beginning to spread by this point. Oh, and there was the novelty of a split release between R&S and Apollo. Sun Electric's self-titled EP, or mini-album, was a double 12-inch with the 2 discs released on 2 different imprints. Most of the material ended up on their debut album Kitchen a few months later, although there are a couple of exclusive alternate mixes here. As for Kitchen, it ended up on R&S as the duo had begun to work in techno territory. Nevertheless, a lot of the album is very ambient friendly. Opener UFO threatens to launch into rave territory but remains beatless and euphoric. Despite a brief diversion into 4-to-the-floor beats, Serotti is mostly melodic synth work. Sad Face and Happy Face, despite its relentless beats, is heavily atmospheric, ethereal pads and bleeping samples bringing textures to things. Argent is spookier, with metallic clangs and lonely synth drones. Sonification is ambient techno of the Aphex Twin variety, and Up the Drains synths twinkle and sparkle like rain over a busy city. Closing track Lichterfeld fades out on gentle pads. With half the album aimed distinctly at the dance floor, it's not as suited to home listening as a lot of records from the same era, or indeed many of Sun Electric's other albums, but the more ambient leaning material shows the pair already had an aptitude for the style. On the whole, 93 was an odd year for Apollo, with the label still finding its feet somewhat, putting out a small number of releases by artists who, for the most part, wouldn't go on to feature heavily in the future. 94, in contrast, will be very different indeed. Over to Warp Records. Their 1992 compilation Artificial Intelligence provided a template for 93 with 6 albums released as part of the AI series, the artists behind them all stemming from the compilation. IDM was developing in other corners too, but nowhere as obviously as this series of releases. Surfing on Sine Waves is one of the most tonally consistent of Aphex's early releases. While his records frequently jump all over the shop in terms of style and aggression, the one album released as Polygon Window has its own sinister vibe that runs throughout. The beats are mostly fairly gentle rather than distorted, but the melodies rarely evoke the pastoral beauty of Selected Ambient Works 85 to 92. The atmosphere falls closer to something like Analog Bubble Bath 3 with its images of sinister Cornish countryside, ancient woodland and strange stone circles. Portreath Harbour even glances forward at the strangely detuned synths that would define some of his later work. Quinofec, a bonus track on later issues of the album, is the most obviously ambient thing here, with a haunting, heavily reverberated synth and distant percussive loop, and the track could easily have fit on 94's Selected Ambient Works Volume 2. Accompanying single, Quoth focuses more heavily on the rhythmic side of his material. Bytes by Black Dog Productions is a collection of pieces produced by the 3 members of the Black Dog in different combinations under different names. The music finds the trio operating in an area not dissimilar to Aphex and Music, a beautifully melodic section of pads joined by off-kilter, scratchy, often harsh-sounding beats. There's a distinct electro influence, especially on the close-up over tracks, while the plaid numbers are suggestive of the tightly programmed breakbeats of the music the project would release after splitting from the Black Dog. The result is an erratically varied album that's low on atmosphere but high on fascinatingly strange ideas. Not quite ambient, but close enough, and a unique take on techno. Another group operating under numerous aliases were B12, which also operated as the name of their own label, which was releasing 12 inches under these different names. Part album, part compilation, Electro-Soma is an excellent collection which highlights the best of the group's material. That said, neither member were actually fans of ambient music at the time and were surprised to find themselves linked to the scene. Beatless Opener, the stunning soundtrack of Space, was recorded at Warp's suggestion. The pair were huge fans of Detroit techno, and finding that the style had been overtaken by hardcore in the UK, began to put out their own techno material under different names on the B12 imprint, attracting a small cult following, some of whom may have been under the impression that these were actual Detroit imports. B12 became one of a few groups in the UK releasing music in this style. Many original techno practitioners, of course, created music that was deeply soulful and often quite gentle in feel, and Electro-Soma is absolutely at home alongside this material. Rich, wistful melodies, crisp but mellow beats, and sci-fi imagery abound. There's not a weak track on the album. The down-tempo basic emotion would fit in well with other ambient material of the time, but otherwise this is definitely a techno album with all the crossover appeal that implies. In 2017, Warp released a deluxe 2CD edition of the album, with the bonus disc released as a separate 2LP collection called Electro-Soma 2, containing a wealth of material from the era, from 12 inches, CD bonus tracks and unreleased pieces. Remarkably, it's just as good as the original album. It's also interesting to hear the band beginning to listen to ambient music after their first comparisons, as they sample Brian Eno on Debris. Born in the UK but influenced by his time living in Detroit, Richie Hawtin quickly became one of techno's leading lights of the 1990s, helping create and popularise minimal techno, as well as experimenting with other strands of the style. His debut album, Dimension Intrusion, was released on his own Plus 8 label and licensed in the UK by Warp to be the 5th Artificial Intelligence release. Mixing the laid-back melodic strains of classic Detroit sound with the harder four-to-the-floor style that had become big in the early 90s, and roots of the intricate minimalism of his future Plastic Man productions, Dimension Intrusion is a remarkably varied album. A New Day, Dimension Intrusion, Another Time Revisited, Phaetrix, Uva, Night Drive and Into the Space will all be of interest to anyone into ambient techno, with the 13-minute Phaetrix a real highlight, its glittering arpeggios and acoustic percussion samples recalling the pastoral euphoria of The Irresistible Force. The Speedy J project had provided the most overtly ambient material on the Artificial Intelligence compilation, but on his debut album, Yoshem Park opts for a harder, more rhythmic material, foreshadowing the more progressive styles of dance music that would develop throughout the decade. In many ways, Ginger is the least ambient of the 8 albums released under the Artificial Intelligence banner. Autechre's debut album, Incunabula, gets some flack for being fairly simplistic compared to the music the band will go on to create. Despite plenty enjoying all eras of their material, there's still a big split in the band's fanbase between those who wish they'd stuck to their more melodic down-tempo material and those who only enjoy the complexities of their later, more experimental work. If Incunabula had been released by anyone else, I doubt it would face any controversy at all. Though technically a compilation of early works selected by Warp, it's a remarkably consistent album, and one that drips with atmosphere despite its strong electro leanings. Opener cowpole intros, spacey synths and dub delay percussion set this out as a mood-forward album, while Bytes shows off the pair's melodic sensibilities. While I do love later works such as Untilted and Elsec, I do miss their more accessible tunes sometimes. From the cavernous Bronchus 2 to the epic beauty of Eggshell, each track has a strong signature sound and is memorable in its own right. Bass Cadet and Doctrine have harsher beats that break up the album's mellow mood, and Lowride's jazzy tones are a touch misguided maybe, but otherwise this is a collection of melodic synthetic environments that bring to mind vistas and cloudscapes, as well as frequently tugging at the heartstrings. Closer 444 is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I can think of. Bass Cadet was also released as a single, with Beaumont Hannant's remix and the band's own Bass Cadub mix offering hauntingly spacey alternate takes, while the Taz mix is the first example of the band's hip-hop influence really coming through. The Artificial Intelligence series had some commercial success in the UK, with Polygon Windows Quoth reaching number 49, Dimension Intrusion peaking at 63 in the album charts, Ginger reaching 68, and Autechre's Bass Cadet EP entering at 56 in the single charts. Warp's other output in '93 was largely in the area of post-rave techno, although Sabres of Paradise's Sabresonic has a number of laid-back moments that would fit nicely alongside ambient material from the era. The beatless version of Smoke Belch 2 is absolutely divine. Meanwhile, Richard D. James's only Aphex Twin release of the year, On, plays out like an 85 to 92 track with chunkier beats, like something you might find on Analog Bubble Bath 3. On its B-sides, D-Scape and its remix, the misleadingly named On D-Scape mix, are creepy, snaky ambient. Reload turned the original into a soaringly beautiful slice of ambient breaks, more on them next time, while the 28 mix appears to be a wholly unrelated piece of music, a murky drone, much like the CD bonuses from Analog Bubble Bath 3, that is very much in line with the following year's Ambient Works Volume 2, which might even be the source of the track's title. One of the most notable musicians developing IDM away from Warp was the aforementioned Beaumont Hannant, whose work for General Production Records stands alongside the artificial intelligence material in both terms of quality and forward-thinkingness. His first trilogy was the Tastes and Textures series, with volumes 1 and 2 released in '93. The first was a 4-track 12-inch EP, including the quietly beautiful Awakening Me Soul and the sequencer-led space music of T60160293. Volume 2, a full-length album titled Basic Data Manipulation, Tastes and Textures Volume 2, finds Hannant expanding outwards, such as on the hip-hop drums of Symphon 5, the metallic drones of Lieb, and the rolling breakbeats of Anoki. Like most IDM, it's very rhythm-focused, but there's a chilly atmosphere that runs throughout the album that gives it an ambient feeling. Other records worth a listen as part of the developing IDM sound are Bandulu's Guidance and EFS by HEAD. After a single release in 1992, Recycled or Die released 4 albums in what would be its most prolific year in '93. Frequent Sven Vath collaborator Ralf Hildenbeutel was up first with the album Looking Beyond. Although largely known for his trance material with the likes of Cygnus X and Progressive Attack, Hildenbeutel's debut here is an intriguing blend of tribal ambient, abstract improvisation with some poppier moments. The music's distinctively percussive, as evidenced by the opening title track, which revolves around acoustic drum loops, a mix of what sounds like rock drums with tablas, over which synth pads gradually build over the course of 11 minutes. It's a slow burn, but once those pads come in, Looking Beyond is a stunning piece of music. Follow Me cuts the beats and focuses just on synths, with flute-like sounds and warm pads playing a wistful tune for 7 minutes. Sadly, the sounds are a touch too close to New Age to work as well as they might have been intended. It's followed by the similar The Journey, which features far better sounds but wanders aimlessly without much in the way of melody. Prelude for Timeless Time, in contrast, is a piece for electric piano that harks back to Romantic era composition, could easily have come from a film score. It's an odd track that doesn't fit an ambient album at all, even though it is good in its own right. Coming Back returns to the more tribal feel of the title track, and it's almost as good, a wonderful slice of slightly ominous ritual music. Closing track Inner Peace is on a totally different planet again, a warm slice of beautiful bubbly synth music that falls closer to the pastoralism of someone like the Irresistible Force than anything else on this album. On the whole, Looking Beyond is a genuinely strange album that finds Hildenbeutel unsure of exactly what he wants the album to be, and although there are some fine tracks, it's a very disjointed work. Oliver Lieb's Constellation was the second release on Recycle and Die in '93, and harked back to the label's debut, Dominic Uzi's Straylight, in its Berlin School sound. Much has been made over the years of the influence of Berlin School music on trance, and here is one of the key examples. Lieb went on to become far better known for his progressive trance work as LSG with classics like Netherworld, but his debut album is basically a Berlin School record. 4 10+ minute spacey tracks built around sequencers, arpeggios, atmospheric soloing and long synth abstractations. It's not the most original record, but Lieb handles the style well. The tribal percussion of space diving ties together the two most common approaches to ambient on Recycle or Die. Baked Beans are a group as peculiar as their name. The German trio, consisting of Gottfried Tollmann and Nicole Meyer from power pop group The Fred Banana, with Helmut Zerlett, a musician with a background in jazz, synth pop and art rock, and the house band leader for a popular German chat show Die Harold Schmidt Show, they created 3 albums in the 90s, none of which sound quite like anything else in the ambient scene. The self-titled debut consists of 4 long, hypnotic grooves built around percussion loops and deep bass, over which piano restlessly improvises in Bake Dagger, synth strings gradually build in Desert Bean, and guitar arpeggios flit in Heinz 1. while Closer Has Been is a thick slab of gamelan-style tuned percussion and electronic buzzing. The whole thing manages to evoke the kind of Middle Eastern desertscapes a lot of ethno-ambient aims for, without once resorting to the cliches of simply throwing in the instruments and scales of the region. The use of nocturnal insect recordings adds to the atmosphere, but on the whole it's just the immense talent that's gone into the deceptively simple compositions here that make them all winners. All 4 tracks are incredibly Moorish that even a few seconds of listening to has me gripped and happy to play to the end, despite the lack of any real change or variety. Utterly unique and mesmerising and sadly completely obscure, Baked Beans is a genuine highlight of 1990s ambient. Recycle or Die's 4th album of the year carries on with the quality of Baked Beans, albeit in a very different style. A regular collaborator with Ralf Hildenbeutel and Sven Vath, Stevie Be-Zet is one of many Recycle or Die artists who took a break from trance to record ambient music, and he did a fantastic job with the album Archaic Modulation. With barely a beat in sight, it retains a pulse through trancey sequences and arpeggios, but this is no Berlin School-esque workout. Instead, the pieces are wonderfully constructed and all feature richly beautiful melodies that make all 6 tracks noteworthy, although he does commit the sin of putting the strongest track first, meaning everything else is always trying to play catch up. Nevertheless, this is a beautiful, smooth production and some utterly gorgeous compositions that make Archaic Modulation one of the finest ambient albums of 1993. And on that note, I'll say goodbye for this episode. I would love to hear your thoughts on the music I've discussed today. Please do let me know below. There are also subscribe, like and share buttons you might like to press. And I'll be back soon with a heap load more 1993 material. I'll see you then.